So, welcome everyone to the January Arcadia Book Club, when we will be discussing The House in Paris by Elizabeth Bowen. So this is our classic book, our classic January book. This book was originally first published in 1935. And I haven't read any other Elizabeth Bowen. James, I know you have, but considered by many to be her best book. All right, let's discuss.
Has anybody read her before? Any other books of hers?
No. Nope.
Sorry, I'm just looking to find something here that I've got so many different articles and things, and they all look alike. Okay. Who said no? Who was that person who said no? Okay. Yeah, no, she's sort of, even when you read, the really great writers of the generation, say my generation, which is two generations below Elizabeth Bowen, or almost two generations. I mean, she, or two and a half maybe. She, some of them read her when they were young, and then came back to her later, and some didn't know her very well at all. But yeah, and I first read her via short stories, and then read this book and The Death of the Heart. So if you do like her, or are interested in reading something else, the other two novels I'd recommend are The Death of the Heart and The Heat of the Day. The Heat of the Day was really written about, and even dedicated, and I thought in a sort of cheeky way, to this Canadian man that she had an affair with from 1941 until she died in 1973. She was married most of that time in a kind of benign, childless, pleasant marriage, and I think the husband was somewhat long-suffering about that. And then the Canadian man got married, and then after Elizabeth's husband died in the 50s, it became harder for her to only see him occasionally. But that book, The Heat of the Day, is basically written about their relationship in the 40s during the war. And a lot of her, many people think that her greatest short stories are from that period, from a period in the 40s. So if you're looking, I mean, I have two different collections of her short stories, but Every Man's Library, well, they did a great collection with Laurie Moore a few years ago, where they have someone write a beautiful intro and they do a great chronology of their lives. And the introduction of this was published, I don't know, 5 years ago maybe, but John Banville, the great Irish writer, wrote the introduction to it, and it's absolutely beautiful. How he kind of how he admires her subtlety, and so that maybe I also got drawn to her because a lot of the women that I read, the women writers, loved her. So I thought, I should look her up, but so I think there's just an awful lot. I mean, this book is, to say the least, unusual. I guess that's one way of putting it. And you have to kind of, well, let me ask you a question, and then I'll let everybody can talk, and I'll stop blathering. Hi, Al. In the second section, the past, did you did it bother you, or did you find it disconcerting that that it's really kind of her son at age 9 imagining this 10 years ago thing that happened, uh, meaning that much of what happened happens, but it's told really through what does she say? What does she write in the um,
The son. Story of what happened.
oh, right. On page 67, Bowen writes, "This is in effect what she would have had to say if she'd shown up and met her son uh, and told him the story." Um, and then there's this, and then in the story, in the past, she has a sort of intimation of him, even though, of course, she's not even pregnant yet, or she feels, you know, she doesn't have the first intimation, but she even says his name. Uh, and there's just something about that I remember the first time I read it 30 years ago or so. I thought, I don't know. I mean, how could this kid know this? And then I realized, well, it isn't really the kid telling you the story. It's the kid is channeling his mother, and his mother's, you know, trying to present the story in some way that will make sense to him. And then, of course, the bonus is he gets to meet his stepfather and actually leave. But I mean, what did you think about all of that? I mean, it's just I don't know, it's very jarring. I think if you think too hard, if you think too hard about it. Um,
What did you want to speak?
Yeah, I remember, I think I'm thinking of the same part. When she was going to have her tryst and she was thinking about her love and the relationship and the affair, and it was like, well, she was imagining all these future things, right? Even if the affair didn't work out, maybe she'd be pregnant and then her son would come back and be on this bridge and these different things. She already thought it was talking of a son, but it struck me, and I don't know if this is, James, what you were referring to, but in that part when she was going through this whole futuristic thing, already having had sex and now I'm pregnant, and even if it doesn't work out, I've got this son and it will join our love forever. I mean, it was pretty out there and but pretty intense too, you know. But I'm sorry if that's not what you were meaning, but that's what I remember.
yeah, no, that, yeah, she has, someone's calling me here. Turn that down. Um, Chicago Tribune wanting me to do something, I'm sure, like pay them something, you know. The, well, I guess for a novel that was written in 1935, which means it was 10 years after Mrs. Dalloway, and um, what is, you know, it's not that she's sort of breaking any frame. I mean, it feels, it's just like she's pushing against the boundaries of what accepted rules you can have for fiction without trying to say, you know, I'm going to do something entirely different. So it feels, even in that long section of, you know, the mom telling the story, most of it feels just very much like a regular narrative, except for those odd moments when she in essence sees the future or imagines a future. Um, and I find that um, both exciting and but I wonder what people thought when they first encountered it. To say nothing of all of the, you know, the kind of the tension of accepted social behavior and the young woman doing something that's not only is it um, against what her family, for instance, would expect or wish or hope, but she's also, there's the extra energy of the fact that she's doing this with a man who's engaged to one of her few close
Best friend.
um, so that there's a kind of potential devastation that she's risking wreaking, and then of course it does happen, or some of it happens. But then it seems as if, okay, well, it's other people, what did you think about all of, that? And then I have a question that just leapt to my mind from what I just said.
Well, I have a question for you. You were comparing this to previous fiction that was written. So I am used to reading a lot of nonfiction and research. So I'm kind of I'm revisiting fiction. So when you compare it to previous fiction, what exactly are you referring to?
Well, just more in the sense of starting with Ulysses and some of Virginia Woolf's novels. There was sort of a push against the conventional narrative form in 20th century writing, in much the same way that Stravinsky's Rite of Spring in music kind of, that's kind of a marker for the 20th century starting, as far as people thinking what classical music should be or could be. So that these kinds of books started people on another journey, because they would read this and they'd go, oh, I don't have to, I don't have to tell a story from beginning to end. I can do,
Mm, mm.
I can,
I can go to the past and stay in the present and make time up.
yeah, and trust that the reader will follow along.
Yeah.
And the reader won't just throw the book across the room and say, well, I shouldn't read a book like that. It's
Yeah.
naughty, whatever. But so that's really what I was getting
That's
at.
true.
Well, I liked it, and now we see that same approach in movies as well. I'm used to it,
Yeah,
and it doesn't seem novel anymore. But it's a great technique for storytelling.
yeah. Well, and then she picks it up, when she goes back to the present, she uses the same expression to grab you right back to the moment, so you know that no time has passed.
Yeah, yeah,
So
she was very good at. She's very good at doing that. Was
Yeah.
very. Yeah.
It's gosh. Other thoughts? Yes.
Has her hand raised.
Yeah, so I didn't realize in the past section that it was imagined. You know what I mean? Like when I read it through the first time, I just thought we were doing the time jump, just like we're used to in other books. And then I read a synopsis and it said that, and I went, oh, really? Because it's so detailed and it's so long, that section. I thought that's difficult for me to suspend my disbelief that that's Leopold like imagining to that level of detail, right? That was a little bit of a stretch for my little mind.
Right.
You're not,
However, I thought I loved, as you said, the technique of jumping right back into that sentence, which was a really impactful sentence, because that's such a cliffhanger. And then you're like, hang on, we're gonna go back here, and then bam, right back in. I thought that was very effective. The middle section for me was almost too long. Like I was just dying to get back to the present, because I really love those two children and their interaction, and
Mhm.
I was missing them in that middle section, although it was very interesting. And I thought
Right.
her writing in particular was very engaging and funny to me. It wasn't as funny in the middle section, it was a little more serious, but the dialogue was very felt very modern, just the emotions were quite modern to me and relatable. The mother, being so angry, and just, it was that part was great, but that middle section felt like it went on forever to me. I'm like, come on, I want to jump back in. Anyway, so those are my structural thoughts about the book.
oh, great. And what about yeah, because it's she never had children, and but yet she writes children in so many of the
Right.
stories that she writes. I mean, and these two kids are so beautifully imagined. Now, except that you have to start thinking, okay, this is an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, and they're having this kind of remarkable. But then the grandmother just unloads on both of them, and you just think, oh my God. I mean, you try to picture yourself at 11 or 9 taking in all the things that the grandmother is just blathering out.
It's a
And
lot. They give them a lot of, like, they don't sugarcoat for these children at all. It's, it's like, here's the terrible thing, and this is what's going to happen to you. The other character that was my favorite was Charles the monkey. I was just very enamored with this monkey toy named Charles, which is my husband's name.
Sorry.
I know. Did you just say it was your husband's name? Oh, that's nice. That's good. Yeah, I love Charles. Well, I like, I sort of have, well, in fact, over here I have two of my belated Hannah's pet animals still sitting in my room.
I like
So
the way that Henrietta treated Charles. Like, well, I think he likes to observe, like, obviously, and I thought that was very, very realistic to the way a child thinks, very, like,
yeah,
this is Charles and he likes to observe, so I put him here,
yeah, no, I love that too. It's really great. Um, and so yeah, so you feel like these kids are taking in the sort of the tension of adult life without having a way to give it any context, any deep, any kind of shall we say softening context. They're just getting these short, sharp shocks, and then they end up and I think what's most moving about the book is how they end up relying on each other, and they embrace at the end, and they, they've made this kind of connection that in the first half of the present you feel like, well, are they ever going to get past the prickliness and just find out that they're much closer in sensibility than they want to think they are. And Elizabeth Bowen was basically, I mean, her mother died of cancer when she was 13, and her dad had died when she was 9. But she hadn't seen her dad in a while because he had had a breakdown. So she, in essence, you know, there's a lot of Henrietta in her journey. Uh, and so I think she probably understood Henrietta because of what she'd lived through. And also she was, in essence, an exile because she was born in Ireland and then ended up living in England. Um, and so she had that distancing effect that prompted many writers, um, to look at the English experience and the English behavior with that half step away to let them both judge and appreciate in a different way. Oscar Wilde and Beckett and, people like that, Conrad, they all kind of were able to look into English life without having the extra weight of being English. So, yeah, I just love those two kids. I'd forgotten, as I said, I hadn't read it in 30 years. So that was one of the reasons I selfishly, but I fell in love with those kids all over again. They're just so unusual. Um, Comments, other things people are thinking
I
of?
I too liked the bonding between these two children, uh, and it was interesting following their relationship. But I had a little trouble with Henrietta, and and for me, I've never met an 11-year-old that wanted to be the center of attention to that degree. And she talks about this Leopold will be anxious to see her and wanting to see her, and he hasn't even met her yet. And she does this several times in the beginning. Uh, I thought she was rather self-centered when I read that, and it just, I don't know, it didn't sound like 11-year-old to me.
What does everybody people think about that? What did she seem too self-centered and too
In the beginning,
beginning?
in the very beginning.
It's almost like in The Secret Garden, where we have Sarah Crew and she's just so, uptight, I guess is the word for it. Very uptight and a little bit cross and a little bit, and then she softens a little bit in the book, but I can understand why you would have felt that way. She definitely was like a precocious in a very a way that children are not precocious today, a different way, very formal way, and
Yeah.
also of calling attention, to herself and high and mighty with her language about herself, right?
Yeah. Well, I wonder if some of that is, she's traveling for the first time in her life. Her mother's died fairly recently, and her father's sending her off to her grandmother, in Menton, where she's never been and doesn't really know what to expect. And so, yeah, I don't know. That doesn't mean we um, should excuse her self-absorption, but it does. In my mind, it maybe mitigates it a little because there's a sense of displacement, and so kind of clinging to herself because that's all that.
It seems like it all went away.
Look at it.
I was gonna say, I think it all went away in the cab. The cab scene when they were going to the
Yeah.
train in the end was so precious. She's got Charles, the two of them are sitting next to each other. Stepfather's sitting across from them, I believe. And she was talking about leaning up against him, and I don't know if Charles fell on the floor and Leopold picked it. I mean, that was so precious. They were like together, and then she gave him the flower. Here, I want you to have this. Yeah, it was adorable. That was really
Yeah,
just two kids at that point.
Yeah. The oh, and I lost the question I was going to ask before. Shoot. It'll come back to me. Someone else offer other things that you liked or disliked about the book. I have a
Well, I'll say a couple of things.
good
I
job.
guess since Larry's not here, someone has to do it. I I was totally disappointed in the book. I mean, it was just like too deep. Some of the descriptions were just like over the top. There were some magical sentences or paragraphs throughout the book, but for me, it all seemed like a fantasy. I mean, to be honest with you, it was just I lost track of who's related to who and how old were they and how old were they not, and what happened to the tall, dark, handsome guy. It was just it was just too much. I mean, I think if forget the middle part, because we all knew that they were going to screw and have a kid. I mean, why go to all that much trouble to explain that? It's, I felt sorry for the aunt who died and the poor Uncle Ben who just didn't know quite if whatever his name was. I mean, I don't know. It just seemed ponderous. And thanks, I think, Wood, for talking a little bit about the cab ride. That's kind of when I kind of got into it, was at the end. So I mean, I'm glad I read it. I mean, I'm glad I read it, but it was just I think maybe I wasn't in the mood for it. So
I'm so glad you're saying this. Thank you so much, because this is my second time being here, and I thought I'll be the only one who didn't like this book, I bet.
Well,
Oh,
Yeah.
somebody's
I
always.
really disliked the book and found the characters very shallow. And it was at the end when they were in the cab. I liked it. But
Well, I can identify with you very much.
and I wasn't surprised when what's his name? Was it the guy who commits suicide is that Max? I wasn't surprised because well, but when people commit suicide, they're not mentally stable, right? And he wasn't mentally stable in a lot of the things that he said. And I was especially struck by when he decided to ask Naomi to marry him. And he says, finally, the mother's out of the room. And now I remembered she was a woman. I'm like, okay. and and she pricks her finger, and I saw that she now pities me. She pitied me. I mean, and it was okay. But he's mind reading, right? We don't know if she really is thinking this. He creates his own world. And he said, he goes over and he asks her to marry him. And it's this spontaneous, impulsive thing he does. And then he says, oh, it's that Madonna trick, and where, some women are going to make you feel like they're going to bring peace into your life and everything. And I'm thinking this guy has really got some serious problems. And when he commits suicide, I'm not surprised.
Well,
But thank you for opening the door.
oh, you're almost it's very rare that everybody likes the book. So don't ever feel that there's always someone
I
lurking.
could go
Yeah,
on and
very
on
few
about
rare.
these shallow characters, and you wouldn't want to hear it all. But
Well, I just
Yes,
want
please.
to say I agree. I didn't like the book all that much, and I actually skipped the whole past section. I was running out of time, and I'm like, yeah, I know that she had this kid, or whoever. I'll just jump right back into the present, and I started a little bit of the past, and I'm like, I can't read all this. I mean, whatever happens here, fine. So I just went back to the present, and I was glad I did, because it from what everybody's saying, it was a bit ponderous. I'm sure it's probably interesting at some level, but
Well,
um I yeah, and then I think, okay, this was written in 1935. Everybody was probably uptight about talking about anything. And the dying grandma, no, Madame Fisher, well, I think she wanted to get something out before she died, but she's been dying for 10 years. You know, to tell these kids what the truth is, or trying to, and it was just, it was like pulling teeth. It was like agonizing, like, okay. And you could tell that Leopold knew what was up, or it seemed to me anyway, long before anybody told him anything. And these Americans that adopted him, lived in Italy, were just like helicopter parents. It's like he couldn't fart, and they were right on top of him, like, oh, are you okay? It was just like, ugh. So I felt for him, and I was glad in the end that he got taken back to England or wherever. He didn't have to go back to them, and however they dealt with that legally. But yeah, I was thinking, how is this going to end? Are these two kids like going to like each other or kill each other? Because I felt this demon thing in Leopold, that he was not, well, he was not happy, but it just, and I'm like, is this going to go really bad? And he's going to end up, I don't know,
killing Henrietta or killing everybody because he had this demon thing in him. It was alluded to different things, you know, how he looked and his look in his eyes and all of that. So anyway, I didn't really, I muddled through and I did the two present sections and I called it good.
I
Well-
put in the comments that I listened to the middle section as an audiobook because I was really struggling, but I wanted to know what happened, but maybe a little bit faster and while doing something else. And so that actually helped. And that led me to believe that it might actually it could be a good movie or like a limited series where they take away some of her language. I like the way she writes a lot, but as you say, there's a lot of words, a lot of description with seemingly sometimes without purpose, just to talking to talk, but I think if somebody could just to clean it up and tighten it, it reminded me a little bit of Atonement. It reminded me a little bit of Great Expectations with those two kids who are like a little bit unlikable, but you're sort of rooting for them to come to build a friendship or some relationship. You know what I mean? Um, it would be a very difficult book to recommend to someone. I don't know who I could recommend it to. However, I'm so glad I read it because I'm glad I got to know these characters. So, and I think her writing was very unique. Like I liked so much of it. And then there was that big section that I didn't like. So yeah, I have so many mixed feelings about it, but I'm glad I read it,
In the section that people didn't like in the past, one of the things that was fascinating to me was the power that the mother held over Max, and that her, he commits suicide basically in front of her during a conversation that they're having when his fiancée is out of the room, and that she clearly had this very strong feeling about him, and he to her, and it didn't seem sexual, at least on his part, but it was clearly. I mean, if mentioning Barbara, you're mentioning Leopold having a kind of demonic thing, but I felt like Madame had the demonic thing with Max. I mean, there was this kind of, she'd reached into his soul in a way and was, and she was so determined that he'd do certain things in his life, including not marrying her daughter, who she felt she was less than what he deserved. And I felt like that whole quiet story through there, such an interesting, that in and of itself. I mean, to make a movie, you could make a kind of beautiful short movie of just that section of trying to understand her her attraction and connection to him, his struggle with who he was becoming. And, it's just, see, the only thing I would disagree with anybody saying, I don't think that they are necessarily shallow or incomplete characters. I just think I think Bowen, by using the past, she helps you to see how Naomi got to who Naomi is when she goes to pick up the daughter at the train station, and then tries to make sense of. I mean, you try to think about someone like Naomi who has given up her own life, in a sense, to care for her mother after her mother has, in essence, taken her Naomi's chance for an adult life with a man, taken it from her, and she knows that her friend has had the child that rightfully in her mind should have been hers. And to have that child in your house is, I mean, even then, that's another story it's just charting what goes on in Naomi's mind during this it's really just one day, but it's, the kind of tensions that these people must feel, and the guilt that the grandmother or the mother, Naomi's mother, I think the unresolved guilt that she must be carrying for Max's death is just it's all kind of overwhelming to me.
Well, and don't forget that Karen also had the brilliant idea that Naomi should raise the baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, Karen is not my favorite person. She was horrible.
Yeah.
She was horrible. That her best friend, and then there's this one part. Well, maybe Naomi said that. Something they're talking about Max's suicide, and do you want to stay for tea? I'm sorry, but only the housemaid is here to prepare tea. And it's like, are you what? You're talking about someone's suicide, and it's like, oh, our tea will not be lovely. So yeah, so Karen, thumbs down. Karen's husband, thumbs up.
Yeah, I had an image of Madame Fisher never leaving this house, even before she was sick. These young girls would come and go, and she was like strange in a way, and seemed impaired to me in that way. And I don't know if she really felt guilt or not. She seemed she's pretty self-absorbed to me, like maybe in DSM-5 kind of self-absorbed for some reason that we don't know exactly. But I was thinking about, if you look at the psychological things that happen in people's minds, like what you just said about Karen, these kinds of things, and compare it to kind of what we know today about psychology and what mental health actually is, that these relationships and the things that went on, they really were pretty impaired. I mean, Karen was pretty self-absorbed. Max was self-absorbed. Mrs. Fisher was self-absorbed. Karen's husband was one of the coolest people in it in the end, who's a champion, and they kind of thought he was, not much of anything. Well, he turned out to be more psychologically astute than most of the people in it. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's good points. By the way, I know that for Adele and Barbara and Melanie's sake, I just want you to know that when Larry sent us the email telling us he wasn't going to be here tonight, he said he really enjoyed the book.
Oh, he did that. He said that before too.
Yeah.
He said he really liked it.
Yeah.
He said he wouldn't be here. That's right.
Yeah, he'd also like.
Well, good thing we spoke up.
Yeah.
And we still like Larry, so there you go.
Well, I knew Larry really liked the book, and I thought, oh my gosh, I just feel so differently about this book. And then in the end of the book, the mother, well, I felt so sorry for little Leopold, because the mother, I mean, Karen wasn't even concerned about how this little boy is going to feel when she doesn't show up. I mean, he's already wondering about his mother, and he's got a lot of feelings about this whole thing.
Yeah.
And now she doesn't show up. And I'm like, how could she do this to him? Like, it's like a double whammy. So I wasn't very optimistic here. Pardon me?
I like the way it started. I agree with Liz. I was really enjoying the book for the first section, and then they switched into two, And right away I realized I hadn't paid enough attention in section 1 to follow everything. And I started to get tangled up in all of these relationships. And then we get done with section 2, and then it really gets tangled in the end. And I spent a lot of time wondering what was going to happen to the little boy too. I think the father saving him at the end, or taking a chance and trying to save him at the end, was the only thing that gave you hope in this book, because the little girl she was acting as almost a mirror to what was around her. She was reflecting what was going on. And kids can be clever. I give them that, especially when you push them and they don't have any boundaries and they can just respond as they wish. And I think I really enjoyed that first section when they first got together, and I thought, yeah, this could happen with kids just talking to each other. But by the end, I realized that the little boy is really messed up and he's going to have one really bad life. And the father recognizing that and saying, yeah, and for some reason, I love the mother, so it's my responsibility, was just pretty astounding. And so when I went in part 2 and I'm thinking I didn't pay attention, and then as farther along I got in the book, I'm thinking, I'm not going to get this until I read it again. And I think somebody else said, this is a book they go back to every couple of years. It's a go back to book. And it might be, because these are pretty complex issues, and the tangle is really, really fascinating. How the how the madame got control of everybody is really that in itself. And nobody says anything about Max, and he was a pretty interesting character too. So, I enjoyed the book for all the confusion. At the end, I just said to myself, so from what I've read, I don't get it. I have to go back and try to pick up some of these strands and reorganize what happened. So,
Al, I think you just described Adele, Barbara, and Melanie's book club from hell, when you have to reread the.
well, I'm sorry. I thought I gave the book enough time, and I started, and the first section was good. And then when I realized I wasn't catching all the relationships, I thought, too late to go back now.
Yeah, I might have sent an email or something to say she's not. It's hard to read her in a casual way.
Yes, yes.
Right.
You have to be paying attention.
You'd almost have to set up a spreadsheet to keep track of everybody.
Well, it's too bad Robert wasn't here this year to do a map like he did the map. Except a map of this would be like it would be like a Jackson Pollock painting or something. But
I gotta say though, I did, for some reason I like the style, and I don't quite get it. I mean, sometimes I had to read sentences 2 or 3 times to figure out where I should put, to me, would be a comma, or to get things straight. And I don't know, I kind of was enjoying the book. So I'm not going to say I didn't like it, but I'm definitely going to have to look at it again at some point in the future and try one more time to, with a little more perspective, read it.
You know, Al, when you say I kind of was enjoying the book, you know, that's interesting.
Well, nothing made me, I didn't have to finish it. I mean, I kind of, I don't read many books like that, that have that kind of style and that kind of character development and those complex. And it was very, very engaging for me.
I agree with you, Al. I thought the style was really engaging also. And I thought that the way she writes, she's really funny and a very good observer of human characteristics in almost an exaggerated way, though, in these characters. And that kept me going, because with any other book that we're describing, that would be like, I didn't understand the middle, I didn't like the middle, that would have been a stop the hard stop for me in most books, but there was enough that I found, compelling that kept me going as well. And something a little bit funny about it or clever or something. I'm not sure what word to use, but her writing, her voice is very distinctive, and I like it. I would love to see like an interview with her or meet her or sit down to a cup of tea with. She must have been a very interesting person just to even imagine these complex relationships.
Yeah, I think she probably was. Well, she had many friends who were writers and artists and who spoke of how challenging but loving she was as a friend. Um, but I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to sit next to her at a dinner party and then 3 months later, have my life spilled out on the page.
In the book.
She's a little scary in that way, but
The
but
Bloomsbury group, right?
what?
She wasn't part of the Bloomsbury group, was she?
No, she was a little older than that group. She was born in 1899. So she would have been, she did publish her first book of stories when she was about 24, 25, but I think even she thought they weren't very good. I mean, she hadn't, and clearly, oddly, she hadn't read, sort of the big short story writers of that period. She's, and so it's a very unusual, interesting woman.
But she tackles some really tough subjects in the course of this book. And I don't know if that was unusual at the time. I can only imagine it was for a woman writer to just delve that far into those subjects, and find a medium with which to tell it. And maybe using the children as, the lens for part of it, at least, was a way to not soften it, but at least make it palatable to the readers at that time, rather than just the straight, here's the adults and this is what they did kind of thing.
Right.
That's the other thing I mean, this was written in 1935, right in the middle of the rise of Hitler. I mean, and the Jewish character in there, I thought might have been a sort of a reference to that. He couldn't succeed no matter what he did. And there might have been some background. Also, the grandmother, maybe her dealings or what happened to her in World War I were also coloring how she reacted to all the people in 35. But it was really weird for me to read a whole book and not have one reference to a Nazi or the coming troubles that were about to, grab everything. But that was just one of the background things that it kept rattling around as I read it, but didn't bother me in the end. It is what it is.
Well,
A relationship book.
And remember, I mean, I hadn't really thought of it in that context, Al, but the kind of the saddest thing about the French response before World War II was that they had a strong belief that they had a good military and they could protect themselves, and that they were going to be okay. Now, the whole Jewish question in France was very complicated and and certainly complicated in the 30s. But and people like Madame Fisher, I mean, the fact that she took Max to be somebody who was worth really focusing her attention on, I guess you could say, a point in her favor. If you think of her as a French, a wealthy French woman who at that point there was a lot of the resentment towards the success of, maybe I'm just making this up, Al, because you said that, but maybe the fact that he was not obviously from a moneyed Jewish family, one of the Jewish banking families, or the families that people started to really resent. Maybe that he was an other that she could mold. I don't know. That's the thing about this book. There's so many lenses to look at it, and people's behavior is so odd. But I'd never really thought about the historical context of how she might treat him as.
Well, if that little boy would have went back to Italy, his life would have really been different.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Right. Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe he made a great little fascist. It sure was looked like it was going to be. That was his future.
Yeah.
But I think the father really had a good chance of saving him. So.
Yeah. Well, and who knows? He could turn into Tom Stoppard. Tom Stoppard was born in Czechoslovakia in 1937, and if his father hadn't died, and his mother ended up in Italy, in India, and married a British guy who brought them back to England, so that they lived, and this whole family was Jewish, and he didn't even know. All those accidents of living were, especially when you're a child, and an adult either takes a chance on you or doesn't. And I agree with you. In his case, in Leopold's case, that chance that the stepfather takes, gives him a chance to have a life. And he's a very complicated and damaged boy. And God knows what his relationship will end up being with Karen. But at least he has a chance to, let's put it this way, at least he has a chance to get to adulthood and see what might happen. Well,
So I don't know if any of you's read it, but they have the TLDR, too long didn't read, little summary at the end. I think the TLDR for this book is parents never run out of creative ways to mess up their kids.
yeah, that's for sure. Gosh, wow.
Okay, so let's talk about another orphan. We're gonna talk about our February book, which has a child. I don't know. I don't want to. I'm not going to ruin this prize for everybody. But anyways, it's called Time of the Child by Niall Williams, who also wrote This Is Happiness. Set, what, James, 2 years apart from each other, but you don't have to have read This Is Happiness 4 years to enjoy this.
Right.
James wrote about this in the newsletter. So a doctor and his adult unmarried daughter have found an infant. And so that's it.
Set in the west of Ireland, the far west of Ireland in 1952, when the church, as if you've read any of John Banville's mysteries set in Ireland in the 50s, the church had an absolute stranglehold on everyone's life in Ireland. And I can say stranglehold because half of my relatives lived under it. But this is a book of enormous tenderness and beautiful, beautiful writing. So I think everyone else will like it and Larry will hate it. So we can go back to sort of normality in the group. But I want to thank all of you who were channeling your inner Larrys, because it's always good to, get some pushback. But no, I had never read Niall Williams, and with all these great Irish writers, some of whom are quite young, like Sally Rooney, or someone who's like Claire Keegan, who isn't young, but who's gotten this tremendous amount of appreciation in the last 10 years and absolutely deserved. And by the way, if you have not seen the movie of Small Things Like These, you really need to see it. It's a really beautiful film that it must be Cillian Murphy produced it and stars in it, and it's so great. It's just great from her book. But this book just Time of the Child just knocked me over. And the writing is so gorgeous, and yet it's very accessible, and you don't have to do, you can follow things pretty readily, and there are vivid secondary characters too. So when I read it, I thought this is a good book club book, not because everybody will like it, but because it tussles with really interesting, both familial issues and societal issues about the power of, the way the church had such a strong influence on people's lives in Ireland at that time. And just to set the frame of reference before we go for it, what happens in This Is Happiness is that's when electricity comes to this town in 1948. And now in 1952, 19 people have telephones and a few people have televisions. And so that's the way you have to think about it. I mean, this is a town that literally is on the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it's the far western part of Ireland. And it's a town that's insulated by where it is. Everybody knows everyone. And it's and everything, it's a little bit like Spring Green. Everything is everybody's business. But people know a lot about other people who they may not know personally, but they hear the stories. And of course, being good Irish people like myself, that allows them to form strong opinions whether they know the person or not. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But thank you all as usual. Diane, you did not say one word.
I'll just
Say-
give the book one word. Tedious.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. See you all next month.
Hey, thank
Okay.
you,
Oh, what's
everybody.
the date in February?
Yeah, what's the date? Yeah.
Oh, that's Nancy's business. I don't know anything about it.
Okay.
February 19th.
February 19th.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
Night.
you.
Oh, bye.
Thanks, James. Thanks,
Bye.
Nancy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.